Neuron OG came in right in the time that I was preparing. And it came at a time when I had conceptual clarity and I was looking for more of a broader repository where I could actually test different types of questions. So it's a lot more flexible on Neuron OG. I would definitely say that, where you can say that, okay, hey, I want to actually only do 5 questions and I want to do 5 questions on strengthen only. And strengthen hard questions unanswered from the OG, this thing, that really does help. And then the first thing I want to say is that the pool is much wider. The pool is much larger. I'm a little intimidated by numbers. So having like an entire section on quant had been like my first or biggest mental hurdle. I think the critical point was to have some structure to the prep, to have some thinking that, okay, hey, this is how I'm going to go, the sequence that I'm going to follow. These are the concepts that I need to cover, and this is the order that I need to cover them in. That sort of sequence. And here I do want to give a shout out to the eGMAT team, because you guys have actually done the thinking for us. So
Hello, everyone. A very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to another debrief session with eGMAT. Today, we have with us Chaitanya, who recently scored a 725, improving by a massive 120 points. So, welcome, Chaitanya, and thank you for joining in.
Thanks for having me, Abha. It's an absolute pleasure to speak to you. I mean, for our listeners, I'll just say that I've been in touch with Abha throughout my, through a large part of my prep journey. And I feel like it's at this point, I just feel very like surreal, like, oh my God, have I really achieved this? So, still taking time to take it in. Thank you for having me. Thank you for the kind words, Abha.
Yeah, I think it's high time we accepted the score is here. It's all official that you are at a 725. So, Chaitanya, looking back to your journey, I know it has had its own shares of ups and downs. But when you started off initially with a 605. So, what was your biggest hurdle throughout this journey?
So initially when I started at a 605, so the 605 was my first GMAT attempt, which I'd taken without any like focused prep. I had prepped, but I don't think it was a focused prep of like, conceptual clarity and then actually getting like sectional or small practice in, and then doing like a full practice. Of course, when we're all preparing through like haphazard resources, or when we're just starting out, it's a tendency to, do what you can sort of a mindset. And that's what I started with, and I got a 605 from that. And then from there, I've moved on to a more structured preparing routine. And now I'm here at a 725. To answer your question a little more specifically, throughout my sort of journey, like my journey for GMAT, and also broadly throughout my life, math and quantitative aptitude has always been like a sore point for me. I have been the kind of person I can talk my way out and like logic my way out of something, but you give me a calculator and ask me to multiply like 2 5-digit numbers, I most likely will make an error when I'm going from the paper to the calculator and back, because I'm a little intimidated by numbers. So having like an entire section on quant had been like my first or biggest mental hurdle. So that's one thing that I do want to touch upon. And then, of course, the quant in the focus edition doesn't just extend to your quantitative section, but also spills over into data through data sufficiency, and also in some of the graphs and tables and other reasoning questions. So that was on the back of my mind. Okay, hey, how am I going to do this? It's difficult, it's intimidating. It was a big wall that I was standing in front of, but then I have been able to scale it to like smaller steps.
Right. Now, since you mentioned that quant was, your biggest hurdle, at this point, the improvement has also been very incredible. Initially, you started with a Q79, at this point, a Q87, right? A huge, massive jump, right? But Chaitanya, when we talk about an improvement this massive, it takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of structure. So when you look at your quant journey, how did you go about preparing for it?
Yeah. So initially, I think I started out, like I mentioned, I did my first attempt was more haphazard, but then I think the critical point was to have some structure to the prep, to have some thinking that, okay, hey, this is how I'm going to go, the sequence that I'm going to follow. These are the concepts that I need to cover, and this is the order that I need to cover them in. That sort of sequence. And here I do want to give a shout out to the eGMAT team, because uh, you guys have actually done the thinking for us. So there's a lot of thinking already done in the order of the sequence, of in the order of the concepts that are being taught and why they're taught in a certain way. So a shout out there, because that really helped me personally. I went from, being super scared of these things to actually rapidly going through all of these sections, because I realized that, hey, even though I was scared of it, as I was solving these things and I was taking, like, so for our listeners, just I'm sure some of you might have encountered this, but maybe some might not. But the way that eGMAT does it is that there's a diagnostic test initially, then there's a concept, and then there is like an actual practice and conceptual tests for every like section. So I think for me, the biggest, and this is all a part of the PACE framework, right? Which the PACE framework is something that helps you accelerate through your prep journey. So for me, that was incredibly helpful, because that initial diagnostic bit, I don't think a lot of people talk about. For me personally, that was helpful, because the barrier for me was confidence in myself. So when I was taking diagnostics, in the first couple of concepts, I faltered somewhere. I didn't take it very seriously. And in the later concepts, I was like, okay, hey, you know what? I went through this. This question is actually not that difficult if I spend like a teensy bit more time on it. And when I did it, a lot of the diagnostics I kept getting correct. That's something that built confidence in myself, that, okay, hey, I may not have done questions like this before, but I'm actually not so bad at it. And that actually motivated me further to put in more time. So that level of positive reinforcement really helps. And that is all a part of that PACE framework, right? So I saw myself, like, I saw a lot of these conceptual things saying that, okay, the PACE framework that, okay, you don't need to focus on these. So we'll like skip you through them, automatically move on to this next step. And when you see that, okay, hey, I'm actually finishing this, like I had budgeted maybe, I don't know, like 6 hours for these three lessons or these three concepts, and I finished that in two, that motivates me even more to go ahead and like solve things faster. So when I was doing quant, I had not expected to enjoy it so much. I'll be very honest. Because, and I know this sounds extremely like stereotypical, but I genuinely am developing what do you call it, an affection towards like mathematics and the logic behind all of it. Like, it's predictable in the sense that like this thing always will translate to the other thing. There are these other ways to do it also. So as I was getting better at it, I was recognizing patterns in not just the test, but also broader. So this is something that I will recommend to all of the test takers who are watching this, is that don't just like solve for the test. The concepts will actually help you go beyond the test and recognize patterns that will help in the other two sections also. Don't just solve for the quantitative section. So if you're seeing that, okay, hey, to arrive, like just as an example, in a work rates time problem, it's a word problem. You are given variables around each of these, and you're supposed to find, let's say, the total time taken. As you solve more and more, you're not only looking at like formulae, this, that, and the other. I do want to tell our listeners to recognize patterns, in the sense that like conceptual clarity will help you see that there is a pattern here, that I need to get something in this ballpark, that if person A is doing something, if person B is doing something, I need to arrive at this data for person A. I need to arrive at time for person A, which will come from speed from person A or whatever. Like with all your given information and information that you need to find, that pattern will really help, because that not only helps in directly in quant for that question that you're solving, but also in data sufficiency questions, because that's the main ask there. Okay, is this given information sufficient or not? And also broadly, I mean, this sounds a little vague, but in verbal, in verbal questions, you're thinking about, okay, hey, how do I draw inferences from this, or what is assumption for this? So just that logical thinking, I feel like really helps there. So just the long and short of it is that conceptual clarity in quant really helps me like go approaching it systematically, build up confidence. Building up confidence helped me not only tackle the course structure and the actual questions, but also helped
Right.
me recognize patterns going ahead.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And Chaitanya, since you mentioned about pace, I cannot go without saying that you saved a good about close to 38 to 40 hours. And I know that's huge when, you're working on a timeline and you're budgeted with the number of hours that you're spending, right? But also talking about, since you mentioned that, concepts is something that you really drill down. Okay, you use the course, you were able to focus on the concepts. There are also process skills that you developed along the way that changed things for you in quants, I'm sure. Because when we talk about the improvement that you've achieved to get to this level, to get to a Q87, it does not just take the concepts, it's also about
Hmm.
application and execution. So would you
Yeah.
like to elaborate a bit more on that? Like, what were the skill sets that you developed?
I think one thing that's like the process skills thing is something that I had not thought about before at all. Like
Hmm,
initially, I thought about, okay, when I was approaching my 605 attempts, I had thought of it as conceptual clarity is the only thing I need. So that
hmm,
when I actually first took the like sectional lessons, that's when I found out that, okay, hey, I need to actually drill down on these process skills also. Like something as simple as all cases, which
hmm,
is that one, like and this is something that I'm sure if someone's looked at an eGMAT quant solution, which is usually done on like a digital writing pad, and
yeah.
they'll put in like smaller flags, so to speak. Those flags really help because that really helps when you're checking your own work.
Mm-hmm,
If you solved something in a certain way and not considered this other case. So those process skills actually like infer all cases. Then when I'm checking my work with the answer key,
hmm,
that really helps because it helps me see where I go wrong. And
right.
that's something that I actually wanted to also talk about is that in addition to this thing, like in the conceptual clarity phase, one other thing that really helped me was an error log.
Mm,
To actually, when I'm solving this, I kept, and this is not to say that I wasn't making mistakes, I was making a ton of mistakes. And I think one thing that really helped me was that, okay, hey, and I'd read this somewhere that, it's fine if you're making mistakes, just don't keep making the same mistakes every time. And that was one thing that I kept telling myself that, okay, you know what? If I'm making mistakes, as long as there are different mistakes every time as I go forward, I'm okay. If I'm making the same three mistakes over and over again, then I'm stuck in a rut.
mm.
So that error log really helped me recognize that, and those process skills also really helped me like tally stuff with my error log to the solution.
Chaitanya, talking about, your verbal, like verbal was something that you were already strong at. You started at a V83. At this point, you're at a V85. So we are talking about someone who's got from a good score to a great score, right? So when you're talking about this kind of improvement, it's not majorly related to concepts. It's more related to the methods that you have developed or some changes in the strategies that helped you get to that 2, 3 points plus after a stage. So, what were the key strategies or the changes that you did in your verbal that helped you get to a level that you are right now?
Yeah. So here actually, like in agreement with your point that I had conceptual clarity when I started doing this. Like the
Hmm,
V83 also, like I remember when I taking that test, that was one of the sections where I was like, okay, hey, you know what, this wasn't so bad. I remember the 605 attempts. When I took the quant, I was just trying to figure out at
hmm,
first principles in that moment, okay, how do I solve this?
hmm,
Because this is a question that I've never overcome like before. So in quant, I was solving from first principles, but in verbal, I, even though I did not know the exact approach of solving that question,
hmm,
because that strong intuition was there, I could solve it very easily.
hmm,
But when it comes to actual test taking skills or process skills in this moment, I think one thing that I do want to mention specifically, and this is something that you mentioned just before this attempt, like maybe a week or two before this attempt, when I'd reached out to you over email, we were troubleshooting my CR ability. So the listeners, I have always been a little
hmm,
weaker in CR than I have been in RC. RC has been my stronger suit. I can read really fast, internalize really quickly. So RC is okay. But CR has been a little harder for me to comprehend because there's a keywording sometimes. It's easy to get lost in the, okay, hey, is it this? And I, as a person, have a tendency to fall into an overthinking trap. If I even select a correct answer, I might go back to it and say, but this other option is also saying something similar. Let me select that one.
Right.
That was a trap that I was falling in very often.
Yeah.
So in this scenario, I feel like I do want to mention what you told me. And one other problem that I was facing was an extra amount of time. I was taking a 2.5 to nearly 3 minutes for every hard CR question, which is quite high. Let's be real. Like even if we're taking 2 hours, 2 minutes 30 seconds per question for a hard question, it's all right. I would say you can still cover up some of the medium questions, but 3 minutes and upwards, there were some questions where I'm dwelling on it for 3.5, 4 minutes, and I was just not getting it. But later, like what you pointed out was that, okay, don't look at the time pressure as a symptom in itself. Don't say that, okay, hey, I'm being overwhelmed by time pressure, which is why I'm not getting this right. Look at that as a symptom and not a cause. Like that's not a disease in itself that we need to tackle. So the time pressure is something that I did right before this attempt. How I tackled that was I actually did, like on your recommendation, I did maybe 15, 20 questions on Neuron OG. And they were hard questions, and I did not really like time myself. I just went ahead in that and I maintained like a separate detailed error log on the side. So a detailed error log on the side really helped me. And in one thing I did make a point in that error log is to not track the time. So these were taken under, like, because the feature you've turned the timer on to select it, but I was not paying attention to the time. Even after I got it right, got it wrong, I was not looking at the time. I was looking at more about what I did. And one thing that you mentioned really helped was for every question, don't just look at one right, get 4 wrongs in place. So one right option may be like, yes, that's good always. And I took that as a little step further, and in my personal preparation, I kept telling myself that, hey, you know what? We'll come at the one right later. You can convince one right a little more easily, but get your 4 wrongs in place and have robust reasons why these things are. And that's something that really helped because initially I was struggling a lot. And in my previous attempts, in my sectional mocks, everything, I was like, okay, hey, you know what? 3 wrongs, one maybe, and one right, that's good enough because I'm under time pressure. When you take the time pressure away from your mind, that really, you start reflecting. You start thinking that, okay, hey, you know what? Let me focus on getting these 4 wrongs. And then with practice, it automatically falls into that 2.5 minute bracket. And I saw that happen in real time for me over the course of, and I'm not even exaggerating, over the course of maybe a week or so. And one thing that really helped was, in the conceptual lessons, they talk a lot about pre-thinking, which is not something that I had done previously at all. I had not pre-thought any of these. So assumptions, all of that. I don't have that natural blue sky thinking approach. Okay, what could be an assumption? Because if we look at even official guide, like solutions, sometimes you think that, okay, this could be an assumption, but then the assumption is something very outlandish. It's something very like, okay, you're thinking that, okay, sales volume is like, in a question about sales volumes, you are thinking that, okay, hey, population could be thing, and then they're telling you that, okay, yeah, so it's actually like a demand because of the other thing is not a factor. And you're just like, I did not think of this at all. So in this exercise that I'd done towards the end, one thing that I did think about was the pre-thinking may not be exactly on the bullseye every time. Hey, I need to pre-think something such that it bridges the gap between A and B. It bridges the gap between sales volume and revenue. Uh, that is something that I started internalizing after this exercise. After I started recording that, okay, hey, am I like to, and if any of us wants a format of this thing, because it's a modified version of the error log also. So I had actually sat through and done things that, okay, hey, this works for me, this doesn't work for me, this doesn't work for me. Skip this column, added this other column, which I need to focus on. If I need to focus on the specific pre-thinking that I have done, have I thought about whether it bridges this gap? Did I do this? Did I not do this? A little more of a detailed error log. That really helped because in that moment, understanding that, okay, and it builds your gut feeling. It builds the gut in the sense that once you do like 15 questions correctly, or out of, let's say, 20, 30, you do a few questions correctly, you start getting that gut feeling that, okay, especially this is very true for verbal, is that this is what a correct question should feel like. Because you know that, okay, this is how sure I need to be about these four wrong responses. And this is how sure I need to be about this pre-thinking, which I thought about initially. It should be something in between this area. So that really helped me, like building that gut feeling, and it happened over time with practice by maintaining this level. Yeah.
Right, right. And Chaitanya, you mentioned a very interesting thing, and I would like to stress about it because while you were talking about your practice, the good part was you also spoke indirectly about the quality of practice and not just the quantity, right? You would say that, I practice like these 10, 15 questions, I sit through them, and every question used to get into the detail and the depth of it, like why something was not happening, why something was really working for you. And I think that review made a huge lot of difference for you. Now, another aspect is that you used Neuron OG quite a lot for your last final prep. So, like, how were you able to leverage the official questions, and how did the analytics play a role in your prep there?
Yeah, so one thing, I think Neuron OG maybe launched a month or two before I actually started, before I actually took the test. So very handy that it came in right in the time that I was preparing. And it came at a time when I had conceptual clarity and I was looking for more of a broader repository where I could actually test different types of questions. So the broad format of Neuron OG is quite similar to Scholaranium, where you can filter using certain, like a custom test on Scholaranium versus a practice test on Neuron OG look largely similar because you can filter by certain subsections, you can filter by all of those, you can set the time, all of that. It's a lot more flexible on Neuron OG. I would definitely say that, where you can say that, okay, hey, I want to actually only do 5 questions and I want to do 5 questions on strengthen only. And strengthen hard questions unanswered from the OG, this thing, that really does help. And then the first thing I want to say is that the pool is much wider, the pool is much larger. And the second thing I want to say is that the OG questions, I personally didn't notice that much of a difference between the OG and the mock questions. I wasn't even thinking about it that, okay, hey, I'll only solve the OG questions, I'll only solve the mock questions. I was looking at it just in the format of like, okay, there's a larger repository, good user interface, something that I need to like, I can use to quickly check this off. And do want to touch upon the point that you mentioned right now, where you said that, yeah, it's the quality of the prep that matters, and that's something that I instinctively, it goes against all of our instincts that, okay, hey, I need to get so and so many questions done. That's something that we tend to fall into the trap of thinking that, okay, I need to solve 40 questions today or thereabouts, and it's just an arbitrary number, but that's something that all of us tend to fall into the trap of. But I will tell every one of our listeners that, hey, just take a step back, do those 15 questions, but do them so well, and I would say spend 1.5 to 2 times the amount of time you spent on a question. So let's say you spend 2.5 minutes on a question, spend 7 to 8 to 10 minutes on actual analysis of that question. If you've gotten it right, see why you've gotten it right, see whether the solution matches your thinking, whether the thinking that you were doing is it on the lines, because usually the solution will have one or two other lines of pre-thinking also. See whether you thought about that, because that helps you build that blue sky thinking that I was talking about. And then also see that like, are you trying to get at those other 3 avenues? How are you building that you can think about, like, in a sales volume and revenue question, how are you also thinking about this third thing that you didn't think about initially? Start developing that muscle over time. And that comes from that, it's just sitting with that question. It in that moment, it just feels like I'm spending way too much time on one question. But honestly, just put that thought aside. It really helps, dwell on that. So yeah, that's about it.
Yeah, I think really great insights there, Chaitanya. Now, talking about the final phase, Chaitanya, because you have had your own shares of, you've taken a few attempts previously, then, this final attempt, which really turned out in your favor. So, what would be the key things that you have learned along the way that you would like to share with the other GMAT aspirants? Some do's and don'ts that you believe, if you had that checklist handy, it would have made a difference from the start.
I think I touched upon a few things while I was speaking about verbal and quant
Yeah.
specifically. Uh, that is, it's that, yeah, first thing you do is that, like, have your basics in place, have your concepts in place. Once your concepts are in place, ensure your, like, no detail is too insignificant. That's something that, I used to think about. Maybe it's a typo. Maybe they didn't get that right. Maybe that minus sign that you didn't accidentally see, maybe it doesn't matter. It does matter. Trust me, maybe that's the make or break here. So think about that. If you can't see something that's written in a very tiny font, go super close, squint and look at it. Because I was doing maybe a practice test like just before the exam, and I just happened to see one small tiny negative power in the denominator of a question, and that just changed the whole thing. I was like, hey, I know this. I know how to do this. If I'd gotten this right, and then that's when I start paying a little more attention to all of these. So pay more attention. That's the first thing that I will say. Second thing, again, I spoke a lot about building that gut feeling.
Yeah.
Build that gut feeling of actually knowing when the gut feeling is essentially confidence. It's confidence in yourself. It's confidence in the way you solve questions. Build that gut feeling, build that confidence, because that will really help. Third thing is what I talked about is like it's just practice. So the pattern recognition practice that I talked about, understand where patterns exist, how patterns might influence your question. So that's the third thing. The fourth thing, and this is a purely sort of tactical tip for everybody who's struggling at quant. In my entire life, I never memorized mathematics tables. Like multiplication tables is something that I used to hate. In school, I never memorized multiplication tables, but trust me, like now I know what like 17 times 7 is. Don't ask, but I do know. And it's really helpful because it's a shorthand. It's a shorthand for you to solve a lot of these arithmetic questions, to really quickly go through that. So have your multiplication tables handy. I would say from 1 through 20, have them ready. Have your perfect squares list 1 through 30. Again, this is not something that is a prescriptive list. Whatever works for you, whatever you can do is something you can do. This is something that I felt like I could do and I should do. So, which is why I kept the tables handy. I kept the perfect squares list handy. I had a vague idea of how cubes work. So I kept a list of cubes, and that's something that I used to do every night before I go to bed. Like, let's say I finish a grueling prep session, and your mind is so hardwired that you can't fall asleep. I used to say multiplication tables in my head that would help me fall asleep, but the next morning I somehow know that multiplication table, which is good. Do that like 20 days in a row, you're sorted. So I would say that's a tactical tip. And then also a tip about DI is that don't go through the entire data set, go through the paragraph that they give you on top before you actually look at the question. You do that properly, and then you have a hold, like the owning the data set is what they talk about, right? So you own the data set by doing all of that, and look at where there are like dips and this thing. So one point that someone had mentioned is that like recognize, again, I come to pattern recognition here, is that if in DI especially, that's very relevant, is that if there is a discrepancy somewhere, know what's causing the discrepancy or why it could have been caused. So yeah, that's something that I will get at. So without getting too much detail, I think these are the 4 or 5 broad points that I would say are key. Had I known it initially, I would have made a big difference.
Yeah, I think by saying those 4, 5 points, I think you've covered A to Z, all the major aspects from, covering concepts, how do you go about practice, what to keep in mind, sometimes the strategies, what should be your mindset. Everything I think has been covered. So Chaitanya, on that note, I think I would like to thank you for taking out the time today, and I wish you all the best from the entire eGMAT team. And we hope to hear the admit news soon next, right?